let's look at how to do this with sprites. Now, in working with sprites, we create a new project. And again, I'm going to walk through my code rather than taking this live, because this takes about 45 minutes to create. So here, we create a new project. Rather than using a single view app, you use game, because game includes all the connections for the SpriteKit and for the game kit. And we're not really going to use the game kit. The game kit can be used to keep track of things like physics, and where you have particles colliding. It can also be used to keep track of things like scores. And I think potentially even like multiplayer games. There's stuff built in for that. I'm not a gamer, but for those who like playing games, you might enjoy creating some games. So that's where we started with, was the game. So with that, I'm going to cancel and bring up my project. So basically, I just did the exact same thing as we did before, just a few variations here. So in the assets folder, I brought those buttons in. So I created a button for send and descend, one for pause, and that will end up being replaced with the one for resume. So basically the same format we used before. Rather than up and down, I used ascend, descend. And then I created a sprite atlas. So the way I did that was I clicked the plus sign down here, and rather than a new image set, I created a new texture set. And that creates a folder. And then in that folder, I dragged the 4 geese. It will take care of the sequencing for me. Then I would tell it to do repeat 3 and 2. Okay, so that's the assets. Now, let's go over to our, so we have a game scene and we have a game view controller. So in the game scene, this is where we set up our animation. And I'm going to give you some links. I'm going to send out the checklist later this evening. There's some great videos on using sprites that I'll send out that were really helpful to me. I don't recall if it was, I don't think it was Chris Ching. He does some really good videos on the Swift UI I'll send you as well. But we have nodes, we have Sprite nodes. So I created a Sprite node goose frame. This is basically just the square that the goose is going to be in. And I did that because I want the goose to flap its wings inside that animation sequence, but I also want to move him along either to the right or up down. And I can't move the goose node, which is going to be inside the goose frame, because that's going to be the animation of the goose's wings. So we create parent and child sprites. So all this is simply a rectangle. In fact, to demonstrate that, I created one up here that is a colored square. So just to demonstrate that, I'm going to run this. And I have him in a blue square. So I'm animating the blue square, moving along to the right, or eventually ascending or descending. That's what's moving, not the goose image. Same thing when I pause, I'm pausing that frame. All right, so let's end that. And I'm going to get rid of that square. So I'm just going to comment that one back out and just go to just an empty SpriteKit node. So I create that node, and then goose frame in my did move to. So we don't get a did view load, we get a did move method that's being overridden. And our view here is a SpriteKit view. This is created for you. All I did is come in and get rid of stuff in there. By the way, when you create this, you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff that has a hello world and the ability to move around on the screen. In fact, I'm just going to demonstrate that real quick. Let me create a new project. Just an empty game. So I'll call this game demo. Oh, by the way, there's different game technologies here. Reality kit, so if you wanted to do augmented reality, that's what you would use. There's scene kit, SpriteKit. I have no idea what metal is. You want SpriteKit. You can also integrate the gameplay kit here. You don't need to do that for this purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. And so here is our main storyboard. And notice there's nothing here because it's all created inside our, our game scene kit. And so here's creating a label that says hello, or hello world is really what it is. And then they're creating a shape node that they use for mouse interaction. Really, it's going to be finger interaction device. And then a bunch of functions to take care of those finger interactions, including all types of touches. What you'll want to do in your project is basically do this. Actually, get rid of this as well. So you'll want to delete all of that. You'll want to delete this. And you want to delete all of these. Leave the last curly bracket there, and then begin coding. I don't think there's a way to have it do that automatically for you. Now, I'm going to undo that just so you can see what this actually does. So let's run this. This is actually kind of cool as far as the interaction. So there's our hello world. And if I come over here and I can move my mouse, and notice how I get these trailing of the little rounded rectangle. That's what's happening in all that code. If that intrigues you, you can explore the code and see how it works. I'm going to close that project. Okay, so back here in our game scene. So I'm going to take the goose frame and I'm going to position it, and using CG point 200 and 300. Now in this case, for my main frame node here, 0, 0 is in the lower left. And you got to be careful because a lot of sites and videos will tell you 0, 0 is in the center. And that's true on the child sprites, or actually on the parent sprite that we'll place our goose into. But on this first main sprite, 0, 0 of our view is in the lower left. So this is going to put it a little bit inside to the left and up quite a bit. Then I'm going to set the size. And I set the size here to 250 by 155. That was the size of my images. Worked out nicely that way. If those were larger images, I might have scaled them down here. Maybe I'd do half. If I wanted this smaller, I would say 125 by basically 78, 77. And then I add that frame, that goose frame, that node to my view. It'll be positioned there and there. So if we had that blue one, you would just see it, and we didn't have it animated, you would see that square sitting there. Then I took the goose node. This is going to be an animation of our goose. And I set an image named to goose 1. So I'm going to start off with an image. I'm going to set its size, basically the same size. And the position here is 0, 0, which is centered in the parent being goose node. So it's goose node. Actually, I haven't created it yet. When we create it, we're going to put the goose node inside the goose frame. Next, I created a atlas, a texture atlas. This is basically an array of the images. So I said goose atlas equals sk texture atlas named goose flight. And then I used a for loop to go through the images and add them to that goose flight. So just using goose and then the number for the image. Now I'm appending that to goose atlas. Now here's where I add the goose node. So the goose node is added as a child to the goose frame. Next, I'm going to flap the wings. So this is goose node. That's the inner node of our goose. Run sk action dot repeat forever. And the action I want to run is an animation sk action dot animate with goose motion. Well, what's goose motion? That was our atlas that we created. Times per frame 0.15. Now I'm just realizing I didn't create the other two sequences here, the repeating of 3 and 2. So I'm now thinking I wasn't paying much attention because I think we're going to see the animation is not very smooth. Let's run this again. Let's see if that really is the case. Notice it goes from the top all the way down. I was wondering why things didn't seem like it was quite as, seemed more choppy to me, and that's why. So we need to fix that. So I'm going to come back over to my assets. And actually, what I'm going to do is go into my folder. Which we'll go to goose flight here. We're going to add those two gooses. And so I should have done this in Finder. I'm going to take goose 3 and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to make this one goose 5. And this one then should be, we're going to duplicate goose 2. Let's make this one goose, oops, copy. That one goose 2 and goose 2 copy should then become goose 6. So I now need to add 5 and 6 to my atlas. I want to drag those onto the folder. There we go. So now we have 5 in there. Goose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The wings are coming back down, further down, and then more down on goose 1. All right, let's go back to our game scene kit. Okay, so the goose atlas, our count of the texture names just went up. So let's run this, see if it's a little smoother animation. Looks like one sequence might be a little bit out of order there. No, maybe not. Okay. We got the goose moving its wings. I now need to have the goose move forward, and that's, I call a method called fly goose. This is going to be very similar to what we did in the other animation. I want to do multiple animations together. So I want to move the goose vertically. And here I have that goose up down variable as far as y. I'm not moving it towards x at all. I want that to be separate though, because then I also have a move forward where I'm moving it by x. In this case, I'm moving it 5 units with no y. Now, the duration here is the animation sequence of that move. I want to do that really fast. So I set that to basically 1/100th of a second. Now, this was where I had to do a little exploration because I needed to find a way to have the vertical move and the move off the right of the page back to the left to be in an if condition. And the way you do that is create an action block. And the action block, the custom is custom action, again, a duration of 1/100th of a second, and then a closure and I can put code in here. If self.gooseFrame position X is greater than the width of the frame size of my view, it's gone all the way off to the right, I'm going to set the X position back to -300. That puts it far back on the left. And then I'm also checking the floor and the ceiling here. So if we're moving up and down, I'm not going to let it go too far down or too far up. If it is, I'm going to reset the Y position. Then, because you can only attach one action to a run, but we can create an action sequence. So I have goose sequence as an action, dot sequence, and it's a list or an array of move forward, my action up here, oops, that one there, move vertical, that one there, and action block, that one there. And then I can run, oops, and I have to create a goose loop as an action. And the goose loop can repeat forever the goose sequence. And then I run the goose loop animation. That's how you can do multiple animations together. That gets the goose flying. Then on my storyboard, I added 3 buttons. Each of the buttons, click the button here, I set the image of the pause button to BTN pause. Did the same thing with the ascend and descend. And then I created the actions. Now, here's the trick. The storyboard is tied to the game view controller, not to the game scene. So I can't access the nodes from the game view controller. I want to modify the actions of those nodes or stop my timer. So here's the trick. In the game view controller, we have to establish a link between the game view controller and the game scene. And you can create an optional of the game scene to my animation scene. And then I created that actual linkage in the view did load here. My animation scene equals scene as game scene, and then the animation controller equals self. Okay, so that will provide the one-way link from here to the game scene. But in the game scene, we also need to add an outlet. This is not what I just typed in. I didn't drag anything. Weak var, and I call this one animation controller. You could call it game view controller, I suppose, or GV controller maybe, but it's the game view controller optional. And I guess I didn't need to do anything else with that other than to set that up there. Now, while we're here, here are the functions that control the goose going up and down. So I have a pause goose, and all I do here, so you don't need to destroy the timer or destroy the sequence. All you do is say goose frame dot is paused. And when I pause the frame, it paused the animation inside of it. It paused the child elements. Set that to true. If I want to resume it, I set to false. Really simple. Descending the goose. I had to remove all the action because I needed to reset the goose move Y, or in this case, goose up down is what I used, to a -5 to have it descend and a +5 to have it ascend. And then I call fly goose again, which basically creates the whole sequence over again, or should say restarts the sequence. I initially had a method here to stop goose wide. I didn't need to do that, so I removed those. The stop goose Y is being called on that touch button up sequence. So these are the downs. of the buttons. These are the ups. Now let's go back to view controller. So in the view controller, I created the buttons. Let's see, anything else here that I need? This show FPS equals true and shows node count equals true is a little bit of information you can use for debugging. It's down the bottom right-hand corner. You could get rid of those if you wanted. I would leave the ignore sibling order equals true. That's going to be the order in which things are stacked. So if you want to have these in a particular order, we have things flying or moving on top of other things, that might become more important. We don't have that situation here. You could actually get rid of that, I suppose, in this case. We have our let view equals self view as sky view. That's where we're going to use the view and specify the game scene as part of that. Okay, so this again is a closure. All right, so we looked at the other stuff there. Let's jump down to the pause. So here's our pause. So again, this is in the game view controllers in the storyboard. So if, and I'm going to say not flight paused. Now flight paused is a Boolean variable I created up here, and I set it to false. So if it's not false, it's true. So if it's true, then actually, yeah. So we're going to set btn to resume, set the name. So, sorry, set the image to btn resume. And I'm going to, we're going to set it for the control state normal. And then for animation scene, I'm going to call pause goose. So this animation scene links back up here to my game scene and basically sends the message to it to run the method resume goose. And then I toggle flight paused, either true or false. So I have flight paused equals not flight paused. Otherwise, we do the opposite. We send instead of sending a pause goose, we send a resume goose. The ascend, the descend, and buttons are basically similar. I'm just going to call my animation scene and send it the method I want to call it. So not much here, just to make sure those links are connected between the game scene and the game scene or the game view controller. Now, you're looking at this going, okay, you've got a descend stop, and an ascend. Where's the ascend stop? I was lazy. The ascend stop is the same as the descend stop. I'm going to send the same message, so I just linked that to both buttons and did that simply by control dragging to the button. Actually, I think just dragging to the button. So this descend stop is for both of those buttons. If you wanted to create another method for an ascend stop, you could do that and send it stop goose y. That'd work as well. And that is our animation using SpriteKits. So this kit then becomes the beginning, could become the beginning of a game. If that intrigues you and you want to go deeper, you're going to find tons of stuff out there on how to do this as a game, or how to create games. Keeping track of scores, working with physics of objects hitting each other, moving things along a path. Lots of learning to do to create a game. But you now know the foundation.
A question?
Yes.
How do you design an animation like this? I mean, how do you know how to make it look like what you want?
A lot of playing around. So I used to teach animation in Flash. So I'm familiar with working with sprites. So for a cycle, then you need to think about the animation, all the different moves that an animal or an object needs to make. So if you want to have a ball rolling or the earth turning, let's say you want the earth turning, you would have to create the earth as a circle of different views of the earth with the camera looking at it. Okay, That'd be a 2D animation. Now you can take 3D animation as well and use stuff in Flash. That's a whole nother, or use stuff in Swift. That's a whole nother level. But you could take a 3D model and probably have it turn and get different captures of that and use those as 2D images. Let me see, because I was working on another one. Let me show you another one. In this case, wanted an animation of a Rottweiler walking. So I drew, in this, I have 10, actually one of these is the PSD file. So I have 9 elements into my sequence of the 4 legs in different positions. And the head bobs up and down a little bit. Actually, there's 8 in the sequence. I was doing a second sequence where the head turns and looks a little more towards the camera. So I can actually blow this up a little bit. So there'd be the one image. And I added the drop shadow in. And this is a PNG, so this white area is all transparent. So if I have it walking across green grass, you're still going to get the shade of the Roddy underneath through this shadow. This is about 35% black. You can find animation sequences out there that you could use. In this case, I did it. Well, I did them all in Flash, and then I brought them into Photoshop. And so typically what I'll do is I will create, normally I'll have all of the images as different layers, and then I export those layers to get the different sprites. So I hope that helps in terms of how you design an animation. Graphic skills are really important as a developer sometimes. Although if you're working with somebody or working in a facility or for an employer, they're going to have people who are really skilled graphic artists working with you to develop these types of things.
Wow.
Yeah, animation gets to be a lot of work. It gets even worse because you can even do things, and you can do this within Swift. Is you can add textures to objects. So in one of the videos I watched, and I think it's actually part of the Apple demo, they have a plane, which is just basically plain. It's a plain plane, and then they add a texture on top of that of the insignias. So if you wanted 2 planes that look different, you could use the same plane sprite, but add different textures to each one. And it gets a whole lot worse when you get into 3D stuff. But you can also do animations, not necessarily sequence animations. You can do things just moving around the screen. So let's say I want to create a game where we have a ball just moving around. And maybe we're trying to find an exit. Or it's hitting objects as it bounces off the walls. So you could do a ball that really maybe wouldn't even need animation. It's just a little red circle that you can animate moving different directions. And through the physics, you could have it bounce off walls or off other objects or be deflected when it hits other objects. And maybe the idea is to think of what was the old game Breakout, where you had to basically keep hitting a ball against a wall to break the wall down. Really no animation as far as sequencing, just objects that are basically being destroyed and being moved.
Got it. Thanks.
Space Invaders would be another one, or even Pac-Man. Pac-Man, you've got the animation of the little Pac-Man moving, but then you've got the ghosts that are just moving around. There's no animation to them. And then you've got a game field, and all you're doing is you're moving through that maze with the one little Pac-Man doing this, which is probably maybe 2 sequences. Mouth open, mouth closed, maybe 3. That'd be easy to create. So you can create, and we're removing that object, which is the animation, but there's not that sequenced animation you have to worry about too much. Space Invaders, you have the different aliens coming down. There's static objects. There's being moved. The only animation would be the bullets or the missiles being fired. Again, I think those are basically going to be pretty static.
Right, and Pong.
Yeah. So, if you really want to get an animation, a good thing probably would be to do is start with some of those classic video games, arcade games, and try to duplicate those or do something similar to those. When you get into things like Mario Brothers and things like that, it's really no different than what I just saw you, other than you're creating actions where little Mario is jumping over, and then you're maybe moving from one SpriteKit set of him walking to one of him running to one of him crouching to one of him jumping, and it's all being controlled through the user interactions and just changing the timers.
The code in Sprite certainly seemed a lot simpler, but a lot more talking back and forth.
Yes. Yeah. There's a reason why SpriteKit exists for these types of things, because it is better than the way I showed you earlier. The way I showed you earlier is how it's kind of similar to what I would do in Flash. Now I think Flash, or now it's called Adobe Animate, is an ideal package for doing animations. And I like it for drawing. So my Roddy here, I drew that in Adobe Flash. I like Flash much better than Illustrator. It's a little simpler to use. Illustrator has lots of bells and whistles that are really cool. I find it very intimidating. I've never taught Illustrator, so I've never really learned Illustrator, but I've taught Flash for a number of years, and so I know Flash really well, and I like it as a drawing environment. And the nice thing in Flash is I create the body as an object, I create the legs as objects, I create the head as objects, and then all I'm doing is I'm changing the object of the leg, keeping the body the same, and maybe if I want the head to turn, I've got different views of the head. So it's sort of an animation within an animation. So in this case, taking this a step further, let's say this was the frame of our Roddy. And then in that frame, we had the Roddy node, and that Roddy node contained nodes of the body and the 4 different legs and the head. And we could sequence all those together, but give the user the ability to turn the head towards the camera, or look the opposite way, where all you'd see is the back of the head, or looking forward. So we can animate the head separately from everything else. So they'll do that with characters, where each arm is separate. Each leg is separate. And the leg might actually be different things. It might be the upper leg and the lower leg linked together. If you want to learn animation, I think Adobe Animate is a good place to start, because you get the concepts of working with the graphics and with the objects. If I had the time, I would love to explore the SpriteKit and the GameKit more. Again, it's not necessarily the types of stuff that I program, but it does kind of intrigue me. And I had a fun time yesterday creating the little goose animation in SpriteKit.
If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the iOS app development cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.